At my brother's wedding, right in front of our entire family, his bride turned to me and said, "We don't want broken families in our family photos." Then she looked me straight in the eye and added, "You can sit this one out." I froze. Everyone else stayed quiet. My brother didn't say a word. My hand started to shake, but I nodded and stepped back without making a scene. My 10-year-old son, Milo, was holding my hand just a second before. He let go, walked straight up to the photographer, and handed him a small, folded piece of paper. The photographer opened it. Milo looked up and said, "Can you read this first?" I watched the bride shift her eyes to the floor. That moment changed everything. Weddings are supposed to bring people together. At least, that's what I kept telling myself as I zipped up my navy blue dress and helped my son, Milo, adjust the collar of his button-down shirt. He grinned up at me, missing one of his front teeth, looking more like a boy playing dress-up than a guest at a formal wedding. He was excited. He always loved big events, and he adored his Uncle Elias. I tried to match his energy, but underneath the lipstick and curled hair, I was nervous. I hadn't been to many family gatherings since my divorce 3 years ago. I wasn't sure where I fit anymore. People don't always know what to do with single mothers, especially in families like ours that pretend everything is fine even when it clearly isn't. Elias was my younger brother by 3 years. Growing up, he was the wild one, charming, always in trouble, but impossible not to love. After our dad passed away when we were kids, I stepped in and tried to be a second parent more than a sister. I helped with homework, packed his lunches, stayed home when he was sick so Mom wouldn't have to call out of work. I grew up fast. Elias got to stay a kid a little longer, and I never held that against him. I wanted him to have that freedom. When my own marriage started to crumble, Elias was the one who came over with takeout and terrible movies. He didn't say much, but he showed up. When my ex-husband walked out on us for good, Elias carried my couch down the apartment stairs himself so Milo and I could move into a smaller place. That's the kind of brother he was, not perfect but solid when it mattered. So when he told me he was getting married to a woman named Sienna, I was genuinely happy for him. I hadn't spent much time with her, but from what I knew, she was organized, stylish, and very into appearances. She never said anything unkind to me directly, but there was a certain tightness in her smile every time we crossed paths. I chalked it up to nerves, or maybe just a difference in personality. I didn't want to be the kind of sister-in-law who caused drama. In the weeks leading up to the wedding, I texted Elias to ask what I could do to help. He said just being there would mean everything. So I bought a new dress, one that wasn't too flashy but made me feel like myself again. I got Milo a haircut. I even volunteered to help Mom bake cookies for the welcome table. I wanted to show up the way families should. The ceremony was held at a vineyard 2 hours from our town. Rows of white chairs were set up under a canopy of string lights. Everything looked like a page out of a magazine. The weather was perfect. The music was elegant. People were laughing, sipping champagne, posing for photos with the rolling hills behind them. I stood off to the side most of the time, watching Milo run around with his cousins. I noticed early on that Sienna barely acknowledged me. I tried to brush it off, reminding myself it was her day, not mine. She was surrounded by her friends, her sorority sisters, and a flurry of distant relatives I couldn't keep straight. Elias looked handsome in his navy suit. When he saw me, he hugged me tight and said, "Thanks for coming, Cal." He always called me Cal, short for Calla, even though no one else did. It reminded me of when we were kids. I smiled and told him, wouldn't miss it. But I did notice he kept his eyes moving, like he didn't want to linger too long. I didn't take it personally at the time. I thought he was just caught up in the moment. As the ceremony ended and people started to gather for photos, I stayed near the edge of the crowd with Milo. I wasn't sure where I was supposed to stand, and honestly, I didn't want to get in the way. I was used to staying invisible when the spotlight wasn't mine. Still, a part of me hoped someone might wave me in. Maybe Elias or even our mom, but no one did. I took a deep breath, smiled down at Milo, and fixed the wrinkle in his shirt. "You look like a movie star," I told him. He smiled, but then we both turned as we heard Sienna speak loudly and clearly. The photographer had called for family to gather, and Sienna responded with something I'll never forget. But that moment deserves its own space. The ceremony was beautiful. Sienna looked like a porcelain doll in her lace gown, standing beside Elias with her bouquet clutched like a shield. The vows were short and polished, delivered with practiced poise. People clapped. Some wiped tears. Elias glanced toward the crowd once, and for half a second, our eyes met. He smiled. I smiled back. That moment felt real. After the ceremony, the coordinator began gathering everyone for formal photos. There was a list: bridesmaids, groomsmen, parents. Then came the extended family. Sienna's side moved with confidence, knowing exactly where to go. Her mother, a thin woman in a cream pantsuit and pearls, directed people like it was a corporate shoot. Someone called out, "Let's get the whole family!" I turned to Milo, smoothing his hair. "That's our cue." We started walking toward the arch where the photographer was setting up. I felt a flutter in my chest. Not excitement, but something like cautious hope. This was a moment I had prepared for quietly. I would stand in the back, hold Milo's hand, smile for the camera, and take my place without asking for one. As we approached, I saw Sienna stiffen. She looked at me, then at Milo, then at her mother. Something unspoken passed between them. Then she stepped forward, right in front of the group, and raised her hand to pause the photographer. She turned to me, her voice firm and clear. "Actually, we don't want broken families in our family photos." For a second, I didn't understand what she meant. I thought maybe she was referring to someone else. But her eyes didn't move. She added, "You can sit this one out." The breeze stilled. I heard the click of the photographer's lens as he lowered his camera. A quiet ripple of discomfort moved through the crowd. Elias didn't say a word. He looked down at his shoes. I felt my heart kick inside my chest. My ears buzzed, but I forced my face to stay still. Milo tugged on my hand, his little fingers tight around mine. I squeezed his hand and nodded, gently pulling him back with me. "It's okay," I whispered to him, keeping my voice light. "Go stand with Grandma." He looked up at me, confused. "But we're family." My throat burned. I bent down to his level and brushed a strand of hair from his forehead. "It's just a picture, honey. It doesn't change who we are." He didn't move right away. His body stayed stiff. I gave him a tiny push toward the group and stepped back. I moved to the very edge of the patio, where the gravel path met the grass, far enough to be out of the frame but close enough to see everything. The group adjusted. Sienna's mother guided people into position. The photographer tried to bring the mood back. "Okay, everyone," big smiles. I watched Milo stand off to the side. He didn't smile. His hands were in his pockets, and he kept looking back at me. My mother, standing 2 rows in, didn't turn around. She didn't look at me at all. A woman beside me, someone I didn't know, leaned slightly and whispered, "That was uncomfortable." I gave her a tight smile and said nothing. There was nothing to say. The bride had spoken, and no one had corrected her. I stood there for what felt like forever, holding my hands together to keep them from shaking. My chest felt heavy, but I stayed still. I didn't cry. Not yet. Then, just before the photographer raised the camera again, I saw Milo reach into his jacket pocket. He pulled out a small folded piece of paper. He stepped forward and tapped the photographer's arm. The man looked down at him, surprised. Milo handed him the note and said, "Can you read this first?" Every head turned. Even Sienna looked over, her mouth pressed in a straight line. The photographer unfolded the paper slowly. No one moved. No one said a word. Something was about to happen, and none of them saw it coming. But I did, because I know my son. The photographer held the folded note like it might burn his fingers. His eyes moved across the page, slowly at first, then more deliberately. The tension around the group was thick, like the whole patio had stopped breathing. I watched from the edge, holding myself perfectly still, unsure what would happen next. I didn't know what Milo had written, but I saw the look on his face, the way his chin was set, the way his hands stayed at his sides. He wasn't scared. The photographer looked down at Milo again and asked, "You sure you want me to read this out loud?" Milo nodded. I stepped forward slightly, instinctively. My body wanted to pull him back to safety, to protect him from whatever might come next, but something in his stance stopped me. This wasn't a tantrum or a protest. This was something else. This was intentional. The photographer cleared his throat and raised the note. He read, "My name is Milo. I'm 10 years old. I was told my mom can't be in the family photo because we are a broken family. but we are not broken." A few people shifted. I saw Elias glance toward the sound of the words, his face pale. Sienna's expression didn't change, but her posture tightened. The photographer continued, "My mom is the one who makes my lunch every day. She came to my school concert when no one else could. She sits with me when I'm scared of the dark and helps me with math even when she's tired. She is not broken. She's the reason I smile in every photo." My throat clenched. I had no idea Milo had written those words, no idea he had been carrying them with him. The day I taught him how to tie his shoes, he cried when I left him at the bus stop. Now he was standing in front of 30 strangers, standing taller than I had ever seen him. The photographer's voice shook slightly as he finished. "If my mom isn't in the picture, I'm not either." He lowered the note. No one said anything. A bridesmaid blinked hard and looked away. One of Sienna's uncles cleared his throat like he was trying to swallow a stone. My mother looked down, her hands clasped tightly in front of her. Sienna turned away, her jaw clenched, lips pressed into a thin, irritated line. She didn't speak. She didn't move toward Milo. She just crossed her arms and stared off to the side. Elias stepped forward. He walked through the group until he reached Milo, then crouched beside him. "Did you write that?" he asked softly. Milo nodded again. Elias looked toward me. For the first time all day, he really looked at me. His face was a mix of guilt, love, and something I hadn't seen from him since we were kids, shame. He stood, held out his hand, and said, "Cal, come take your place." My legs felt heavy. My instinct was to protect Milo, to scoop him up and walk away, to shield him from any more stares. But then I saw his hand still open, reaching for mine, and I realized this wasn't just about me anymore. This was about my son knowing that the people who love you stand up for you even when they're scared. I walked to them. My heels crunched softly on the gravel, but it felt like thunder in the silence. I took Elias's hand, then Milo's. Together, we stepped into the frame. No one stopped us. No one dared. The photographer raised his camera again. "Let's try again," he said. Real smiles this time. Milo leaned into me. Elias kept his hand on his nephew's shoulder. I didn't look at Sienna. I didn't need to. The note had already spoken for me. In that moment, I didn't feel ashamed. I didn't feel broken. I felt seen. And not because someone let me into a photo, but because my son refused to let me be erased. As we stood there together, the three of us, Elias, Milo, and me, the tension in the crowd started to shift. No one said anything outright, but the silence was no longer stiff with judgment. It was filled with something heavier, something real. People began adjusting their posture. Some looked down, others looked directly at me for the first time that day. But no one stopped the photo from happening. The photographer gave a small nod and took the shot. The shutter clicked. Once, twice, a third time. Milo gave a half smile that looked more grown up than 10-year-olds should know how to wear. Elias looked like he was still trying to figure out what just happened. And I stood in the center, not because I demanded it, not because someone finally invited me, but because my son had reminded everyone what family actually looks like. Sienna stepped back from the group. She didn't walk away, but her body was turned just slightly, her arms still crossed, her mouth tight. She said nothing to the photographer. She didn't acknowledge Milo or me. Instead, she turned toward her bridesmaids, who whispered something that made her shake her head. She kept her distance for the rest of the photos. She was present but withdrawn, like she had lost control of something she had counted on staying polished. When the formal photos ended, people started to mingle again. Glasses clinked. Music picked up. The weight of the moment began to scatter in pieces across the patio, carried by conversation and movement. But not everyone moved on so quickly. A few of Elias's friends came up to me, patting Milo on the back and telling him they had never seen anything like that. One woman in a floral dress said quietly, "That was brave, for both of you." I smiled and thanked her. Inside, I was still steadying my breath. My mother approached slowly. Her heels clicked against the stone path. She stopped beside me and looked at Milo, not at me. "You're raising a good one," she said. Then after a long pause, she added, "I should have said something earlier." I froze. I didn't offer her comfort. I just nodded and said, "Thank you." That was all either of us could manage. Her silence had been loud, but I wasn't there to tally failures. I was there for my son. Later, as the reception began and people filed into the barn for dinner, I walked with Milo toward the buffet. Elias caught up to us near the entrance. He reached for my arm, stopping me gently. "Can we talk?" he asked. I looked at Milo. He gave me a quick nod and headed inside. Elias shifted uncomfortably. "I didn't know she was going to say that. I swear, I would never have let that happen." "But you didn't stop it," I said. He dropped his gaze. "I know, I messed up." There was a pause, not empty, but full of what had been left unsaid for too long. "I didn't want to ruin the moment," he said. "But Milo, he did what I should have done." "He reminded you what family is," I said. Elias nodded. "He's the bravest person here." I could see the guilt on his face, and I didn't want to pour more shame into a wound he now understood. But I needed him to carry that truth with him. "I showed up, Elias. That's what I always do, even when it's hard, even when I'm not wanted." "You were wanted," he said quickly. "I was just too scared to show it." It wasn't enough, but it was honest. He pulled me into a hug. It wasn't showy. It was quiet and real, the kind of hug that comes from years of history, not just a day in a rented suit. He held on longer than he usually would. "Thank you for being there," he said. "I always will be, whether I'm in the picture or not." Then we pulled apart, and I walked back inside, where Milo was waiting, holding 2 plates of dinner, one for me, one for him. He handed me mine and said, "That was weird, huh?" I smiled. "Weird and perfect in its own way." He nodded. "Still glad we came." "So am I said. And for the first time that day, I truly meant it. The drive home that night was quiet. Milo sat in the back seat barefoot, his dress shoes tucked under his arm like a secret. He had danced until the very end, twirling around with cousins, sneaking extra cupcakes, and laughing like nothing had happened. But I knew it stayed with him. Kids understand more than they say. As I watched him through the rearview mirror, I thought about everything that had happened in just a few hours. I had come to my brother's wedding prepared to disappear. I had come ready to stand in the background to let the new family form without needing to be seen. I didn't expect to be welcome. I just didn't think I'd be openly rejected. But I hadn't come alone. I came with my son. And while I stayed silent, he chose to speak. When we pulled into our driveway, Milo unbuckled his seatbelt and leaned forward between the front seats. "Did I make things worse?" he asked. That question cut straight through me. The fact that he had to wonder broke my heart. "No," I said. "You made things clear." He looked unsure. Uncle Elias looked kind of mad. "He wasn't mad at you," I said. "He was mad at himself." We went inside, and I tucked him into bed without much fanfare. He asked for an extra story, so I read one. Then he asked if I could stay with him until he fell asleep, and I did. When I finally stood up to leave his room, he reached out and said, "I'm glad we're not broken." I turned back to him and said, "We never were." I went to bed that night feeling something I hadn't in a long time. Not anger, not sadness, not shame. I felt still. Not because everything had been resolved, but because I had seen who stood with me when it counted, and that mattered more than being accepted by people who only valued appearances. In the days that followed, a few people from the wedding reached out. One of Sienna's bridesmaids sent a short message on social media. "Your son is incredible." That moment really opened my eyes. Elias called 3 times before I finally picked up. We talked for almost an hour. He apologized again without defensiveness this time. He told me he had shown the note to Sienna afterward and that she didn't have much to say. He admitted that was hard to hear, but necessary. He also told me something I hadn't expected. He said, "I didn't realize how many people were just pretending to belong until I saw the way Milo stood up for you." That was the most honest moment of the whole day. I told him I appreciated that. I didn't ask about Sienna or the photos. I didn't need to. The truth had already been captured, in front of everyone, with nothing more than a folded piece of paper and a child's voice. Weeks passed. The wedding photos were posted online, perfectly edited, carefully cropped. But in one, just one, I saw myself standing between my brother and my son. I wasn't in many others, and that was fine. I didn't need a gallery to prove I had been there. That one photo said everything. When Milo saw it, he smiled. "I look taller in pictures," he said. I laughed. "You stood tall, that's why." What I learned that day wasn't something new. It was something I had always known but never said out loud. Family isn't the people who look perfect beside you. Family is the people who choose you, the ones who speak when others go quiet, who refuse to let you be erased just to keep the peace. We didn't leave that wedding with party favors or compliments. We left with something much more valuable. We left with the reminder that we are whole, just as we are. And sometimes the smallest voice in the room is the one that tells the truth no one else is brave enough to say. I didn't need their approval. I had my son. And that was enough. If this story meant something to you, if it reminded you of your own strength or someone who stood by you when it mattered, share it. Send it to someone who might need to hear that they're not broken just because someone else couldn't see their worth. Leave a comment below. Tell me about the moment you realized your voice mattered or when someone stood up for you in a way you never expected. I read every single one. If you haven't already, subscribe to the channel. I've got more stories that dive deep into what it means to be human, to love, to lose, and to heal. And if you like this video, hit that like button. It really helps more people find stories that need to be heard. Thanks for watching. I'll see you in the next one.